Finding out you're pregnant is a very exciting time. Time to buy all the nursery furniture, all the baby clothes, the accessories, the nursing pillows, the pumps, all of the cute baby things that we think we need. Also a good time to prepare for your labor and take a private course, a private hypnobirthing course, or any other courses that help you to feel prepared for the big day. But what about postpartum? Why do we not prepare postpartum so well? Why do we focus on the pregnancy and then the delivery of the baby, but we don't think of the aftermath? In today's episode, Alana takes us through her 2 pregnancies and how with the first one she prepared well for her labor and birth, but didn't prepare at all for the aftermath. And in Alana's case, she experienced postnatal depression, which made everything a lot harder. She also had trouble to establish breastfeeding, and she really struggled with that for 3 months. Being diagnosed with postnatal depression was already a battle for Alana because she had to fight with midwives saying, oh, it's just the baby blues, when deep down she knew that it wasn't normal and it probably wasn't going to go away in 2 weeks. And that's because of Alana's history of depression. And once she was diagnosed, the journey wasn't as straightforward as taking a pill and feeling 100% better. Alana really highlights that her journey to recovery was really long and it was a lot of trial and error. There wasn't one thing that really worked for her. She had to work with a psychologist. She had to do both one-on-one and group sessions. She also found that exercise was helpful. And she had to work through her birth trauma and work through her feelings to finally feel like her head was out of the water. And I think this is a really important conversation. So in today's episode, we focused a lot more on the postpartum aspect of Alana's story because there was a lot to talk about and a lot to share there. We do chat about her birth, but we focused the bulk of the episode on her postpartum journey and the journey to recovery, especially while navigating being a first-time mom and navigating societal expectation, mum guilt, and all of those things that we experience as young mums. You are listening to Cuppa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia, exercise physiologist and doula. And every week I chat with a mum or mum-to-be about all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. The stories you will hear in this podcast are real and sometimes raw, but they are all told without any taboo. So grab yourself a cuppa, put your earphones in, and enjoy this episode. Hi, Alana. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
No worries. So do you want to start by introducing yourself? So telling the listeners your name, where you're living, and who is in your family.
Yeah. My name's obviously Alana. I'm 35 and I have my partner, Matt, 4.5 or a little bit over, son, and another one that's due on the way in about 2 weeks.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Are you nervous, excited about the birth?
I guess I'm a little bit nervous just because it's been a little bit, it's been a while since I've done this. But I'm hoping that it wasn't too long ago that I won't have forgotten sort of things. I think it'll probably just be the adjustment to not getting much sleep and all of that sort of stuff that comes along with having a newborn.
Yeah, that's right. So I like to start the podcast by asking all of my guests, did you always want to be a mum?
I I think I'm quite a maternal person generally. So not just in terms of sort of being an actual mum. I think I'm fairly maternal across the board. But I did find that I wasn't necessarily sort of 100% sold on kids probably until I was in my late 20s. So I think it sort of started to develop a little bit later for me. And then, sort of, I guess you sort of like have one and have that sort of whole experience. And then, you either decide that that's enough and you're happy with just the one, or you decide to go on. So yeah.
That's right. And this time around it will obviously be different, but you also have Kai, who's he'll be able to help, at his level, obviously, but he can, grab nappies, grab wipes, and he can like entertain his brother or sister. I don't know what you're having.
Another boy. So, and that's what I'm hoping, that they'll be able to spend some time sort of bonding, and before Kai, heads off to school and all of that sort of stuff. So,
so that's interesting because, at some point Kai will be going to school, and so you'll be back to having a baby / toddler almost at this point, and it'll be different.
Yeah, that was sort of roughly, I guess, the sort of like the plan. So sort of I think for me it'll be good having sort of like, Kai there, but it'll also be nice when he goes off to school. Because, little kids can be fairly sort of full on, especially if you have boys. And it'll give me some nice time to spend with the, with this one. So
that's right. Your pregnancy with Kai, was it planned?
Yes, it was. This one actually wasn't planned, so this came as a total surprise. Kai had been planned, and I'm obviously as a first-time mum, you have no idea what you're, what's going to eventuate or what it's going to be like, and I guess it's sort of, it's been nice sort of over the last sort of like 5 years getting to see him grow up and mature and, change and express his opinions about things and all of that sort of stuff.
Oh, amazing. So when you were pregnant with Kai, did you know what sort of model of care you wanted to go through, what options you had available around you as well?
I had sort of like, I guess I had a vague sort of like idea, but I'm sort of more of a go with the flow sort of like type of person. So I kind of just went along with what the midwife sort of suggested, I guess, and sort of just I ended up having gestational diabetes and things like that. So I knew that there was also sort of a bit of sort of like an increased risk if I, wanted to pursue things like home births or things like that. I was quite sort of like happy with the hospital sort of system and seeing midwives and obstetricians when I needed to, and things like that. So
Did you see the same midwife every time, or did you see a different one?
No, I think I elected to see different ones at the time, and I may not have had a choice. I think as well with gestational diabetes, because I think I was seeing so many different people. I think the obstetricians were like almost every sort of second visit or something like that. So I think I was under a slightly different sort of system.
So how did you find your pregnancy unfolded with gestational diabetes? Did you end up being medicated for it?
No, I was actually really lucky and didn't end up being medicated for it. I was able to control it just through diet and just making sure that, sort of lowering sort of carbohydrates and things like that, which was difficult because I had so many food aversions with Kai. I actually had really bad vomiting and nausea up until about 6 months, I think it was. And I literally couldn't eat. I know. It was pretty bad. I couldn't eat any vegetables. I couldn't eat fruit. I couldn't eat meat. Basically, I think I existed off like corn chips. That was basically all I could eat.
Oh,
So
no. Oh, wow.
I know.
Do you know they say like, oh, in pregnancy, you need to eat healthy. You need to eat your 5 cups of vegetables and your fruits. And then when you've got aversions, you're like, I can't. I physically cannot. Like,
No.
it's just
Yeah.
no.
It was pretty bad. So
Did you have
thankfully,
HG? Like, did you have hyperemesis gravidarum?
no, I don't think. I think that you only have that if you have it the whole way through the pregnancy. For me, I didn't have it the whole way through the pregnancy.
Lucky.
But it was pretty. It was pretty bad up until the 6-month mark. So yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's horrible.
Oh, it was. It made the pregnancy, I think most of the pregnancy sort of relatively miserable because I was so sick all the time. But yeah, interestingly enough, I've had like sort of nausea and a little bit of vomiting and but really bad reflux this time around. So
wow.
So it was different. Yeah, it was quite different, and no food aversions really. So
which
there you
one
go.
Better? Is it better to have vomiting and nausea or to have reflux?
I don't know. Potentially, it might be better to have, if I'd been given anti-nausea sort of medication with Kai, I probably would have dealt with that better. Yeah. But unfortunately, with reflux, they typically won't give you reflex medication until the baby's fully developed. So okay. I've had reflex up until, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, I guess, really bad reflux. So the whole pregnancy. I know.
Oh no, see that's bad because we know that reflux is made, like it gets worse, especially in the 3rd trimester because of the pressure of obviously the growing uterus, and it pushes things up and you've got just so much pressure. And if you can't get medication, that's really harsh. Wow.
No. So that was sort of hard. But yeah, so I just didn't have the food aversion. So in some ways I think this pregnancy may have been slightly easier in certain ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's different each time, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, that's right. and you know, just like probably your baby will be different to how Kai was as a baby as well, because they're different. How did you prepare during your pregnancy? Did you prepare for birth, maybe for breastfeeding? Did you prepare for maybe the afterwards, you know, the postpartum as well?
Yeah, so definitely with Kai, I didn't even really think about the postpartum sort of like period, I guess. Being a first-time mum, I think a lot of people kind of forget about that period, I guess, because you've never experienced, you don't know what to expect, so you just don't really prepare for it. It's more, and I guess there's a lot more sort of anticipation around sort of the labour process and, you know, preparing for all of that rather than, the, you know, the 2nd, 3rd or sort of, you know, 4th or whatever times that you've had a child. You're sort of much more of aware of what it entails.
Yeah, definitely. That's right. And that's part of why I was asking, because I feel like as first-time moms, we get told you need to prepare for birth, you need to write a birth plan, you need to know, you know, what could happen, what you want, what you don't want. And then there's not much talk even around breastfeeding, even though, you know, it's recommended you breastfeed, all of that. And there's no talks around postpartum. Like, no one talks about it. They're just like, once you've had the baby, it's like, yeah, you've had the baby. Cool. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I ended up with a episiotomy with Kai, and that was something that I had not been sort of like prepared for really. Sort of, obviously I did sort of like birthing classes and things like that, but it wasn't necessarily something that came up that, you know, sort of in any sort of significant way, I think, during the classes. I also wasn't prepared for cluster feeding when babies are born and they go straight into cluster feeding because my son was feeding every half an hour to 45 minutes for at least the first 2 days of my hospital visit. which was really hard in terms of not having slept beforehand, either, because I was in labour for such a long period. So so those sorts of things I sort of wasn't prepared for or aware of, I guess.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. And see, that's something I'm like, I was the same, and I'm hearing that a lot. It's almost like I feel like we're not told, because obviously you don't know what you don't know. So yes, you know your baby's going to come out, but if you don't know what to expect, you can't imagine it. There's no way you can imagine what's about to come, like how difficult it is to look after newborn, the sleepless nights, the fact that depending on how long your labor was, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And then you get a baby and you're like, I'm exhausted. I want to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's when it's really important to have some plans in place around sort of, having support there for you, because those first 2 weeks, I think, are that sort of, kind of crucial sort of like period for helping you to sort of adjust to that, newborn sort of baby sort of like experience. And if you're not feeling confident about it because you're tired and you haven't slept and you're having troubles with breastfeeding and, all of the rest of the issues that can come along with having a child, then it's, it can be quite a sort of difficult experience.
Exactly.
I think, especially if you've got nobody around you saying, actually, this is really normal, or this is why this is happening and all of that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. And what I find really hard too is in the public system, right? After you've had the baby, you've got no support for 6 weeks. Like, I mean, you've got a GP if you can get into your GP, but you usually mums don't go to GP to say, oh, is this poopy nappy normal, or is it normal that my baby feeds, every so often, or is it normal that they burp that way? Like, it's usually questions you'd want to ask your midwife, not really your GP. And some GPs they don't know, like, they can't really help you. And so that's difficult. If you're not in the midwifery group practice, you just don't have that support, which is crucial. But it's the way the system works, really.
It is. I mean, here in New South Wales, we have community midwives. So often you're discharged from the hospital into the community midwives, which come out from the hospitals. But there's also sort of another group of nurses that are also sort of midwives that only work with sort of postpartum. So they can usually I think you do visits to them. They can probably come out in sort of crisis sort of situations. But I found with my son, I had to use them fairly regularly because my son wasn't gaining weight. Even though I was sort of, breastfeeding and sort of things like that, he didn't return to his birth weight for quite a significant amount of time. I'm not even sure what the issue was at the time. It may have been issues with sort of supply or, something like that. And I ended up having to do formula top-ups and things like that. So I actually probably had to see midwives once a week to check on my son's growth. But even then it becomes sort of difficult. I think also because of the pressure around breastfeeding. And, sort of like we all know that sort of like breastfeeding, ultimately is, in a lot of ways is probably better than formula feeding. But sometimes you don't have a choice. And I think it's, the importance of recognizing that sometimes you just need to do what's right for, your family and the baby.
Exactly.
Because, like obviously unhealthy or like a child that's not gaining weight is not going to, is not going to thrive. So,
that's right. And I think, because they used to have this campaign, I don't know if it was the same in New South Wales, it was, breast is best. And they've stopped doing it because it's not always best, like if we're talking mental health, if the woman's having mental health issues and breastfeeding is what is bringing it on, then obviously that's not best because that's not good for her health. And same in your case, you know, not gaining weight, which is super important for newborns. Well, if breastfeeding is not, you know, helping, then, you know, formula top-ups, perfect. You know, you got to do what works.
Exactly. You do. And I think, like I think we still have the breast is sort of like best message sort of around, like around here, at least where I'm sort of like from. But I would definitely advocate for using formula if it's impacting, you know, if breastfeeding is impacting on your mental health in any way. You know, if you have supply issues, if you know, have developed sort of mastitis and things like that, and you just can't, you know, you can't do it, or if it's just you know, if that's just what you've chosen, that's they're, you know, all choices are perfectly sort of like fine. It's just what works for you, really, at the end of the day.
And you're the mum, so you know best what's right for your child. No one else can say, oh, no, your child needs to have breast milk. Well, no, because as you know, the mum, I know best. So I'm deciding.
Yeah. And I think that that's really important for first-time mums to realise, because I think I fell into a lot of that first-time mum sort of guilt, especially seeing sort of midwives where they basically advocate, you know, breastfeeding sort of, you know, I guess a bit too much, shall we say. You know, sort of I think at the end of the day, if something's not working for you and you feel like you would be better off trying something else, just do it, because it's, you know, sort of that it's, if it's important for you for your mental health, then at the end of the day that takes priority over everything. Exactly. I think.
Yeah, that's right. So how did your third trimester go? So you didn't have nausea and vomiting much more at this point? Fantastic.
No, not to the same degree. So I have had a bit of nausea, but that's from the reflux. So it was separate. It was kind of separate issues, I guess, to a degree. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't have it as, I wasn't vomiting as much, which is, you know, a beneficial thing, I think. So yeah.
Oh wow! And so, what was the first sign of Kai's labour beginning?
I think I remember waking up, and I think I had really bad period type pains, and I wondered if this was the start of labour. Because my stomach felt like it was turning inside and out. And, you know, obviously not having gone through it, I didn't know if it was, but then my waters broke and I knew what it was. So, yeah.
Were you past your due date or before? I mean, I don't like to say due date, but, you know, that's how it's calculated.
Yeah, I was 5 days early with Kai. So, yeah, so, you know, sort of fairly sort of normal, but a little bit earlier, I guess, than sort of semi-expected.
So it was a
fairly normal.
Yeah.
Yes, and my waters broke.
So your waters broke. And so did you still have contractions, cramps, or did they stop then?
No. I still had contractions and cramping. And then I think obviously I must have this was a while ago now, but I think I must have just started timing the contractions and went into the hospital, and I was about 3 or 4 centimetres dilated by that point. Yeah. And they decided that it might be a good idea for me to start off with a shower or jump into the baths that we sort of have here. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it completely stopped the labour process. So I ended up going back home, being sent back home. Probably after, I don't know how long, maybe after about five hours or something like that, I was sent home and told to come back when the contractions had started up again. So I went back to the hospital again, and I think I'd only dilated to like 5 centimetres or something. And then they ended up giving me sort of basically I ended up being induced and having a Foley's balloon and sort of some sort of like hormone sort of type thing to try and intensify the contractions. And eventually I ended up sort of obviously at some point the contractions sort of picked up, and I think I remember hearing so many women giving birth and screaming, and I was just like, it's time for me to get an epidural. So honestly, it's not a good way to go, hearing everybody give birth. It definitely makes you on edge, shall we say. I must have heard about 5 or 6 women giving birth in that time. So I know.
Wow. Did that make you stress?
I know.
Because, I mean, that sounds stressful, really.
Yeah. Yes. I didn't necessarily want to sort of like medicated birth originally before I went in. But hearing that made me think that no, like sometimes there's just, there's a reason for medication. So I went with the epidural. So, and I was very grateful that I had it after that.
Yeah.
So
Good.
Definitely stopped the pain.
Yeah, good. Did you still feel contractions without the pain, or did you not feel anything?
I did.
Good.
No. I could feel the contractions, but it just wasn't. It was like contractions without the pain. So I could feel the pressure and everything, but I just couldn't feel as much of the intensity of pain. So, so for me, it worked, pretty well.
Amazing. Oh, that is so good. And see, that works. Obviously, that works better when pushing comes, because you can actually you know what's happening, so you can push with your body instead of like, am I having a contraction? Can I push now?
Yeah, and it was, I mean, even the pushing part of Kai's birth was challenging. I think from memory, he had his shoulder stuck, I think, when he was coming out. So I think it's referred to as shoulder dystocia. Yeah. And so my pushing time was an hour and a half. But like I could still feel that whole sort of process. I ended up with an episiotomy, but that was just because he was stuck. I think they would have had to have given me a cesarean or something anyway,
right?
Or do the episiotomy, just because he wasn't going to come out sort of naturally in that sense.
Wow.
So
amazing. And so your labor was long. You said, I think it was like, did you say 32 hours?
Yeah. 32 hours. So a very, very long one. I didn't sleep during that time. I think I had a heap of adrenaline running through me. And was just, one of those labors.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because I was going to ask if after you got the epidural, you could snooze, like kind of doze off a bit and but no.
I was definitely more relaxed after the epidural, because obviously you're not getting that full-on sort of pain sensation. But I don't remember going to sleep. I feel like I had too much adrenaline running through me at that stage. And I think I'd been up for like way too long to actually sleep. So it didn't make me sleep. But I have heard that it makes a lot of people sleep. So
yeah. And I mean, if sleep, doze off, or if you can just snooze for like 30 minutes, an hour, like anything helps at this point. So whatever rest you can get is good.
Definitely, especially if you're preparing for breastfeeding.
So then Kai was born. Did he go straight onto your chest?
No, because he'd been stuck, his heartbeat started, I think from memory, it either dropped, or I think it might have dropped quite significantly, which was why I think they decided to do the episiotomy. And then he was blue when he came out. And I think he was taken off by the pediatricians because they needed to get some oxygen into him. Yep. And they also had to check his blood sugar levels because I'd had the gestational diabetes, which they do with all sort of babies that have mothers that have gestational diabetes. And then I think once the checks and stuff had been done, he was popped onto my chest, and I was able to hold him and stuff like that. So,
good. And so how was that after so long, so much adrenaline? He's finally here. He's on your chest.
It was a bit of a surreal moment, to be honest, because I felt like I'd been pushing for so long, and then all of a sudden he was just sort of like there. It was definitely sort of a I don't think I even knew how to sort of like react to it. I think I was just so exhausted that it was just was just completely sort of knocked about, and had this baby that was just suddenly sort of like there. And it probably took me a couple of days to kind of adapt to that, I think. So just because it was, like, I'd say it was a fairly sort of traumatic labour in a sense. So, yeah.
How long did you stay in hospital for after he was born?
I'm pretty sure it was about 3 days from memory. So I think except like not including the sort of like the labour part. So it might have been 2 to 3 days or something like that. I think with first time mums, they like to try and get breastfeeding sort of established before you go back home. And I also had the episiotomy, so I think they had to check. And I also had postpartum hemorrhaging with Kai. So I think they had to keep me in for a little bit longer. Yeah, to make sure that I was, doing okay, and iron levels weren't too low and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So
Right. Did you?
So I probably
Did you need a blood transfusion or not?
No, I was actually lucky because I actually have haemochromatosis, which is too much iron in the blood. So, and I didn't I knew towards the end of pregnancy that it was a possibility that I had it, but after I had Kai, I lost, I think, almost a liter of blood. And my iron levels hadn't significantly declined. They were just at that of an average sort of woman. So we realised after I'd given birth that my iron levels had been relatively high, basically. So in that sort of respect, having the haemochromatosis, I guess, helped.
That's interesting. So through your pregnancy, your iron level must have been really high or like quite good, right? Yeah. It would have been. And then so after I gave birth to Kai, my iron levels must have gone down to sort of, I think, to average, basically, just to the average sort of, I don't know, an average sort of woman's. But this time around, with this one, I'm on the verge of anemia now. So this one's been sucking all of the rest of the iron supplies that were there. Wow. And I've somehow ended up with low iron levels. So that is so interesting.
Yeah, I know.
As you said, 2 pregnancies, it's two different experiences. It's
been quite sort of strange, and I've definitely noticed the fatigue more in this sort of pregnancy. Unfortunately, I can't keep down iron tablets, so I haven't had much success taking sort of iron tablets, so I kind of just have to increase my sort of red meat and intake and things like that. So
Haemochromatosis, is it genetic?
It is. So usually you get, I think, a gene from one or both parents, and apparently I have the version that's of haemochromatosis that is maybe slightly less severe than one of them. My dad has haemochromatosis and has to have blood taken sort of relatively frequently. I just got I got the lighter version of it to some degree.
Only reason why I'm asking is because I was going to say, is there a chance that Kai and baby 2 are, I guess, carrier of the disease, but they don't have it?
Yeah, potentially. So I haven't had them sort of like tested. I mean, it's typically, haemochromatosis typically isn't an issue until later on in life. So my dad, I don't think my dad had any issues with it until he was sort of in his maybe sort of like mid 60s. And for me, it was only diagnosed when I was pregnant, and that was just because I had blood tests that were testing for a range of sort of different things. So I actually found out about it before my dad did. So yeah,
interesting. Yeah, no, I was
but
just interested in that. Yeah,
it is definitely possible that the boys could end up with it, especially if my partner has a gene for it. So
yeah, interesting. So how did you go with breastfeeding? So you tried to establish it in the hospital, and did it? Were you successful at it?
To a degree. I think like I definitely. Kai had a lot of issues with latching. He was a very he was quite a fiery sort of like child at birth, I think, to begin with. And I don't think patience was his middle name, shall we say. So I think he became incredibly frustrated with breastfeeding, which made me anxious as a new mum as well. So I ended up breastfeeding him, or at least mix feeding him up until 3 months. And then he developed, an aversion to breastfeeding basically, and just wouldn't breastfeed at all. So I had to move on to formula. So, and it was sort of a good thing anyway, because he still wasn't putting on enough weight. So, it sort of helped with his, weight sort of like gain and things like that. So, So I'd say my start was fairly haphazard, shall we say.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, as we said, you tried it. And it just wasn't what was best for both of you. So there you go. You did it for 3 months. I mean, that's amazing. Breastfeeding is so hard. It's so difficult. And obviously you've got to learn it. Kai's got to learn it. And newborn, they've got no patience because they're just hungry, because they've got such a small stomach.
They are.
So they're just hungry. They don't want to have to work for it. They just want to be fed.
No, they just want to be fed, and they want to be fed sort of basically now. And he's, even at nearly 5, he's still the same now. So that personality trait hasn't changed. But yeah, I mean, I wish I'd known. I know. I wish I'd known that, with a baby, that a lot of that behaviour is, fairly sort of like typical, and that it is a really exhausting sort of process. I don't think, and that's sort of really emphasised enough by anybody, really. So,
no, that's right. It's exhausting to be breastfeeding, because obviously it's energy taxing. It's using, your calories. It's your nutrients that are, your nutrient store that are going down, and for women with even a normal level of iron, it can drop further when you're breastfeeding, because the baby gets the iron as well. And obviously it's a lot of mental load, like you're up at whatever time you're feeding, you're resettling, you're putting baby back to sleep, and then all through the day, you're breastfeeding. I never counted how many times I breastfed, because I didn't want to know. Because
I don't think anybody does.
And I mean, unless you're that type of person, I didn't want to know personally. I'm like, I don't want to know how many times I'm feeding, because it's a full-time job, like beyond full-time job even.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't realise how, I don't know about you, but I was never somebody that could nap during the day either. I've only ever been able to sleep at night. So I found that sort of process, like I couldn't really recharge at all throughout the day. And just, that constant breastfeeding and the hunger that goes with it as well. The, I don't know about you, but I was excruciatingly hungry all the time. So when I was breastfeeding. So
worst thing is if you don't have a snack nearby and you've got, like baby's falling asleep on you, and you're like, I'm starving. Like, I'm just starving, and you can't reach anything, and you're like, I'm frustrating. I'm so frustrated.
That was one thing I planned for this time around, was making up snacks and stuff in advance, because I knew that that's a good possibility again. So, the things you learn.
Exactly right. So how did you navigate being a first time mum? You know, how was your recovery, you know, physically but also mentally after Kai was there?
I think it was fairly, I found it a really intense process for me. I, like, within the first 2 weeks, and I think because I did struggle with breastfeeding and sort of also I developed a lot of insomnia, as well as recovering from an episiotomy and things like that. I think my whole sort of nervous system was completely sort of overwhelmed. So I knew within myself probably by that sort of probably by that 2-week mark that I was very likely had postnatal depression. I sort of knew that it wasn't just the baby blues. I think the midwives that had been coming out to see me sort of were like, you know, this is just the baby blues. But I knew within myself it wasn't, the way that I was feeling wasn't normal. Yeah. So I, you know, sort of like I definitely really struggled through that sort of, you know, I think that sort of baby kind of period, unfortunately. So mine, I don't know if mine was the best experience, but I certainly learnt a lot from the experience, basically. So, yeah.
So did you tell the midwives that you were feeling, or, you know, did you tell them how you felt and that you felt not, you know, something wasn't right inside of you?
Yeah, I did tell one of them who, like, she was a really, really lovely sort of midwife. She actually stayed back to see me give birth to Kai. And she sort of like popped over for a visit, I think one day, and I said, look, I think I've got postnatal depression. I'd already had a history of depression, so I could kind of identify it, I guess, within myself. But I think again, like, you know, I was still within that sort of like 2-week period. It could have been the baby blues. But so she was sort of, I think that sort of got dismissed a bit. But yeah, you know, sort of like I kind of knew. So from there, it just meant basically having to go to the doctors and things like that. So
yeah, and I think it's tricky because the way I was told when I had my baby, it was like, oh, for the first 2 weeks, you know, obviously you've got that drop in hormones, you've got, if you're doing breastfeeding, you've got, you know, different hormones and that, and it's like, oh, for the first 2 weeks, it's quite normal to have baby blues or to feel down, and obviously, you know, you're sleep deprived, it's really hard, you don't know what to expect, and then it's just really hard, it's overwhelming, all of that. And then it seems like midwives, they kind of hope that after 2 weeks, or, you know, 2-ish weeks, obviously it's not like 2 weeks straight on the dot.
No,
they kind of hope that you start feeling a bit more at ease, or you kind of settle into, you know, the first time mom role, I guess. And I guess for you, you just knew from the get-go, and I guess having depression, you know what it's like. So you could identify that. I'm not sure it is, obviously, you know, without knowing what the baby blues is, but you were still like, nah, it doesn't feel right.
No, I think I think for me the thing that differentiated it was the severe insomnia. So I was probably getting maybe 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night. And I just literally couldn't sleep. So I think for me, that's what made the difference. It wasn't just me being a bit sort of like hormonal and sort of, you know, adjusting to things. It was actually that, my sleep was really off. My anxiety levels were really high. I could feel myself, you know, like I was crying a lot. You know, which I think is totally, in some ways, is totally normal when you're struggling with breastfeeding, and, you know, probably even if you're not struggling, like with breastfeeding, it's still a challenging sort of time. So I think it's easy to pass, you know, I think it is easy to pass off. And like, you know, I guess nobody wants to tell a first time mum, well, you know, like, chances are you have postpartum depression, or, you know, any of that kind of stuff, because it's, I guess it's a bit of a challenging sort of thing in some ways.
How did you go about, I guess, being diagnosed with it? Did you have to see your GP for that?
So basically I took, because I'd been seeing the midwives out in the community for weight checks. I think they must regularly sort of do postpartum sort of depression sort of checks. So they have a little, I think it's a 10-question questionnaire here that they use to diagnose postpartum depression. And I think I did it a couple of times, and I was relatively high in terms of, the rating for postnatal depression. So they advised me to go and see a doctor. And unfortunately, the experience with that doctor wasn't that great. I think she also put it down, the depressive sort of symptoms, I guess, put it down to being a first-time mum, and kind of pushed it aside a bit. And so eventually I ended up actually seeing another doctor because I felt like I needed to be taken sort of seriously. And that doctor was sort of a lot better in terms of sort of, I guess, in terms of managing it and establishing sort of a mental health plan and things like that, and helping me to access a psychologist and things like that.
Perfect. So, wow, it's hard, isn't it, when you're a first-time mom, you've never experienced that before, and then you have to fight with the doctor and to be heard, even though that it's not right. That's so hard.
Yeah, it is. And I found that by that time I was just completely frustrated, I think, by the sort of the entire process. And obviously I wasn't feeling well. So it's hard to advocate for yourself when you're not, when you're not feeling well, to be assertive and to do all those sorts of things.
Yeah. And again, coming back to what we're not told about, mental health, both in pregnancy or even preconception, because mental health is a thing all throughout your life, but we don't talk about mental health as it is, let alone in pregnancy, let alone in postpartum. Yet it's huge, because if you're not feeling well mentally, it's not going to go well. The whole experience of looking after a baby, being sleep deprived, having to troubleshoot a baby, because whether the baby is formula fed or breastfed, they're probably going to have pain in the stomach, and they're going to have gas, and they're going to cry a lot, and so on. And trying to navigate that while you're not feeling well is huge. And we don't talk about postpartum depression. We don't talk about anxiety. We don't talk about that. We just say, oh, you might have the baby blues, you might cry for 2 weeks, but that's pretty normal, and then just brush it off and go, oh, it's just because you don't know what you're doing. No, we know that moms, if you listen to moms, they will actually tell you the diagnosis. They will tell you what's wrong. So they will say, I think I have depression. And that's the diagnosis there. But if the doctor, the midwife is not listening, you had to fight. You had to see another doctor. That could have been a barrier that could have stopped you. And it could have hugely impacted on, your life, Matt's life, Kai's life. But, obviously you surpassed it because you knew, no, I'm not right. I need someone to hear me and to actually do something rather than say, oh, you just don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it was only due to I think in a lot of ways, it was only due to my background in mental health that I knew that this, I had postpartum depression, and that I needed to try and deal with it sort of quickly, because they do know that the earlier you tackle postpartum depression, the less severe it typically is. And it was something that I just knew that, I needed to get access to certain things to try and improve, just my mental health generally. So,
Yeah, no, that's right. And yeah, see, that's, we don't all have the same cards in our hands. And obviously you were lucky that you had that background in mental
yeah,
health, so you could identify
yeah,
symptoms, signs, and therefore be really
yeah,
advocating. But I'm
yeah,
thinking of all the other moms that just get dismissed and go, oh, okay, well, I
yeah,
don't know what I'm doing. That's why I'm crying all the time,
yeah,
even though it's like baby 6 months by now.
yeah,
That's just sad.
yeah,
So, it's like if you think something's not right and you're not heard, then see someone else,
yeah,
because there will be someone
yeah,
that will
yeah,
listen. And it's hard.
yeah,
It's so hard, because finding a GP is hard. Getting into a GP is hard.
yeah,
Changing
yeah,
GP is hard. Some
yeah.
GPs don't take new patients. Um,
No,
but yeah, sometimes you've
yeah,
got to see someone different and tell your
yeah,
story again, to then be heard, to then get
mm,
help. Because I
definitely,
mean, there
definitely.
is help.
And I
And
think that, if I sort of looking back and probably in hindsight, I probably would have tried to choose a doctor that had an interest in maternal sort of like health.
Mhm.
And probably sort of probably a female doctor that I sort of had a sort of connection, a good connection with. I almost think it can be really beneficial if you don't have a regular GP that you see, to
Mhm.
go and actually try and find one, because I think that relationship, if you've got a good relationship there, you can sort of talk quite openly
Yeah.
about things. Where if it's you're seeing a new person, there can be a lot of sort of fear and sort of hesitancy, and sort of for some mums it might be a concern about the baby being sort of like taken away, like they're going to think
Mm.
I'm a mental case, or like or
Yeah.
something like that, rather than just realizing actually this person's just struggling and making up a plan as to how to sort of help them. Because I guess if you don't know the person, it can be hard to it can be hard in that
Yeah.
circumstance to know whether it's baby blues or depression. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
sometimes I almost feel like you have to go in and tell them what you want. So you almost have to walk into the
yeah,
office and say, I think I have this. I want a mental health plan
yeah,
because I need to see a
yeah,
psychologist. And I feel like when you say
yeah,
that, then it really guides the conversation. And so the doctor goes, sometimes they still do try and dismiss, and I don't really know why. And they
yeah,
kind of go, oh, look, maybe, it's going to go away in a week or whatever.
yeah,
And other times, they will just go, oh, okay, this person is informed. And that's the thing. You need
yeah,
to know, like, if you don't know, you don't know. You're not going to guess that you can get a mental health plan. It's hard, but there is help. And as you got access to a psychologist, that's really amazing.
yeah,
Did it help
yeah.
you as you were seeing the psychologist and talking through your experience? Did it help you?
It did. So I ended up seeing a psychologist who did one-on-one as well as group,
Mm.
sort of, I guess, sort of sessions as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was definitely, I think, helpful to understand the biology around postnatal depression and anxiety. Sort of the social factors that can influence it, different, management techniques for it. But I have to admit, like I did find it still a fairly sort of, a fairly big sort of like struggle. I think, I don't know, I mean, I guess I can only speak for myself, but I did have to muddle my way through a fair bit. And it took me a long time to process to process that experience and to understand it. So yeah, like definitely the psychologist I think was helpful, but it wasn't just the psychology that helped. I definitely think exercise helped a lot. So I think I made it a mission to go for like a 45-minute walk or so, like every single day. Definitely helped, I think, with sort of like raising sort of endorphins and things like that at times. Also, you know, sort of like just in terms of my sort of like physical sort of like health and sort of energy levels, it helped. In that sense. And I think at one stage I did have to go to the doctors to get some medication as well. Unfortunately, the medication didn't work for me, but I think that it definitely can work for some people. And you may need a holistic approach to, you know, to treating sort of depression and anxiety.
Yeah. And we know that mental health it's obviously not the same for everyone. So you don't treat it. The treatment you would use is not going to be the same for two moms who, you know, had a baby at the same time and so on. You know, it's individualized and you need to find what works. And so for you, medication wasn't something that worked. So there's no point in being medicated. So there you go. But I think there's as you said, it's a holistic approach. It's, you know, some people need a routine. So they need to wake up at a consistent time, and maybe they get up before baby so they can do a few things like having your shower and you know, doing your hair and doing your makeup. So, you know, that makes you feel more confident, more ready. Or it's doing your exercise, for example. And then it's, you know, like then baby wakes up and then getting into the routine. So for some people, that's what helps. And it's finding, as you said, it's finding strategies that really help you to cope with motherhood. You know, the whole lifespan of motherhood is hard. Obviously, it's not just the newborn stage that's hard. It's baby teething, it's baby sickness, it's you know, it's different milestones, it's toddlerhood, you know. So there will be a lot of periods which are difficult, where maybe you sleep less and therefore your mental health goes down. And so it's about finding strategies and also being able to access maybe more help when you need it, when maybe something else has happened in your life and you need extra support. And just finding strategies with the help of a psychologist, maybe even a psychiatrist if that's someone that could help. And just learning to manage. I think first time moms, again, if you don't have the confidence that, you know, you're doing everything right, you're doing everything you can, that's a really big thing in affecting your mental health too. And it's hard to be confident as a first time mom because you just don't know if you're doing it right, if, you know, if this is normal, if it should be that way, you know, you just don't know a lot of things. So you're like, oh. And I find talking about it, like talking with other moms, you know, mums groups, and saying, you know, oh, this is how I'm feeling, this is what's happening in my life, baby's feeling this, and then mom's going, oh, me too, I cried on the way to the mums group today because you know, the baby was having another meltdown, like the fifth one for the morning, you know, like just talking about that and going, oh, I'm not the only one, like it just feels good too.
Yeah, it does. And I definitely think that any of those mothers groups and things like that, as long as they're a supportive environment for you, and you feel like you can openly express things and you don't feel like you're being judged or, you know, you're just not getting along with the other moms, I think that any of that sort of stuff can be really beneficial. And, you know, getting out of the house like at least once a day, I think it's really important not to get stuck inside. You know, to sort of, although your life isn't going to be the same as it was sort of like pre-baby, like still making sure that you get out sometimes for a coffee with your partner, or you know, you go to the beach or something like that. Those sorts of things are actually really important, and you don't realize how important they are for, I think, for normalizing you know, normalizing the process. So
that's right. And it's a big transition when you become a parent for the first time. It's, in as much as you can prepare, you just don't know what it's going to be like, and then you have to find a whole new routine, because obviously getting out of the house takes 3 times as long. You know, you sometimes you know, you're like, oh, I usually go to coffee at 10 a.m., but now baby naps at this time.
Yeah.
So, things like that. So you've just got to find a new way to make it work, because it's still possible. If baby naps at 10 a.m., well, potentially you can still go for your coffee and put them in the pram, wheel them around, they fall asleep, you have your coffee, there you go. So it's still doable, but it's about finding the balance and also taking the step to go out, because, I find, and I could talk about mental health and all of that for hours, but the other thing in postpartum is obviously you've gone through labor, and there's a lot of body image as well. Like sometimes you still look pregnant for weeks afterwards, and somehow that's super embarrassing and we should hide. But no, because when we've gone through labor, yes, that skin, that stretch has to go somewhere. And it's normal to, like, there's no shame in still looking pregnant or just, obviously you've still got that extra weight. That's normal. You've just given birth. There's no need to hide, but somehow I feel like, everyone is like, oh, a pregnant body looks great. But then once the pregnant belly is gone, it's like, oh no, oh, that's disgusting. I don't want to see that. But that's how it is. We shouldn't hide. We shouldn't be ashamed. We need to do the things that make us feel good without thinking, oh, that person's going to think I'm really fat, or that person's going to think this, or I feel like I shouldn't be showing myself, or I shouldn't wear this dress. It's like, no, you just do your thing.
And I think, like, even just, finding clothes that you feel really comfortable in, like your chances are you're not going to fit into the same clothes that you were wearing before you fell sort of pregnant straight away. For some people it might be that they that they lose all of the baby weight within 2 weeks. For some it may be that they retain it for the next 9 to 12 months. I think it's just about making yourself feel good in the moment, like no matter where you fall in that sort of spectrum.
That's right.
And realizing that weight's not, your weight isn't everything at the end of the day.
No, that's right.
So,
I don't like to talk about pre-pregnancy, post-pregnancy weight. I like to talk about how you feel and whether you're able to hold baby, carry baby. You're able to put baby down, pick them up, and you don't have a lower back ache, and you don't have your knees that are aching, and you're not feeling like, oh, I can't get up while baby's in my arms. It's about being functional and feeling like you can do the things that are involved with having a toddler, having a newborn, and you feel good, and you feel strong in your body, that's what I like to talk about, rather than, you need to get back to your pre-pregnancy weight. Well, no, you need to be strong, and you need to feel like you can pick up your baby toddler. You can do it. You can put them down. You can, all of those things we have to do.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with that. And, I think maybe the second, and third and fourth sort of times around, they, I think you do understand that sort of perhaps a bit better, that this is just a natural sort of part of the process, and that, you're the way that you move, and how your body is sort of functioning is kind of more important than your body image at that stage, than what other people think of you at that stage. So
exactly. So let's go into your second pregnancy. So it wasn't planned. How did you find out you were pregnant?
No. It was actually quite a funny story. So my partner's mother was in the Gold Coast, and we'd gone up there for her 60th birthday party. And we had a sort of like a nice sort of like birthday party for her. And suddenly I woke up that night, in the middle of the night, and I said to my partner, I'm pretty sure I'm pregnant. And my breasts had like increased by like probably a size or two. And I was just like, nah, this isn't this isn't normal. And my nipples were sort of really sensitive, and I was like, I'm pregnant.
Wow.
So sure enough, the next day, actually before work, I made my partner go and get some pregnancy tests because I knew that I was going to be a mess all throughout the day otherwise. And I did a couple of pregnancy tests, and sure enough, I was pregnant. So
were you
so that was definitely a surprise.
Oh wow! Were you early into pregnancy, or did you find out a bit like midway through the first trimester?
I feel like I was probably 6 to 7 weeks along. Okay. So I noticed a really significant change just in my, sort of size of my sort of breasts, like literally overnight. So that's just how it happened.
Well, at least you found out. Because I had a guest before come in, and she didn't find out until she was 13 weeks pregnant. So I mean, sometimes you find out a bit late. Through if you don't know, you don't know. Again, you're not going to guess it.
And for people that have irregular periods and things like that, I think that experience can be, or aren't getting any weight gain and things like that. That can be a totally normal experience. Unfortunately for me, I tend to put all of my weight on in the first and second trimesters, so it's very noticeable quickly.
Okay. So. Lucky you, I guess.
It's just the way it goes.
So how did you feel mentally, because he wasn't planned? So had you spoken about a second baby, or was it just not on the cards?
Look, we talked about it. So it was something that I was considering, maybe sort of like in another year or two. Like, I knew that I was getting older, and chances are that my fertility rates would start to decline a bit. But sort of when it happened, it was certainly not planned. It gave us, both of us, really quite a big shock. And I was quite sort of like nervous about it. I was scared that I'd go through, a similar process that I'd been through with Kai, and was nervous and worried about that. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's something that you, for a lot of people, that they probably adjust to over a period of time when they find out they're unexpectedly pregnant. So for me, it probably took a couple of months, I think, to adjust to it.
Well, I mean, it's obviously huge news, and when you haven't planned it, it's difficult. It's just, and you just think, maybe it wasn't the right time, but I mean, it's difficult. Like when it wasn't planned, and you just go, okay, it's happening. It's you've got to process it, obviously, and you've got to see how it's going to fit with your current routine that you've got as a family of 3. You've got to see how that's going to fit in, obviously, and mentally, it's hard, because when you're not prepared for it, it's harder to digest, I think, in a way.
Yeah, I think it was. And, obviously as well, there was a bit of guilt, because I just had, we'd been at a sort of 60th party, so I'd had, 4 or 5 drinks or something like that, and sort of like the next day finding out and realising I was like, I hadn't taken any prenatal sort of vitamins, any of that sort of, I hadn't done any of that sort of like preparation work that I had done, with my first one. Yeah. So there was a bit of sort of guilt and, anxiety around that, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
And I feel like also when you're pregnant and you didn't plan it, there's also guilt of maybe not being happy, or just not, jumping to the roof straight away and going, I'm pregnant. And we need to normalize that. We need to normalize saying, look, it took me time. Obviously, you're really happy now, and, you can't wait for baby 2 to be born. But let's normalize still saying it took me by surprise, and that's how it was, it's obviously something huge, something that's going to change, your whole life, your whole family dynamics. Yes, it does take time to adjust, and that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I don't, sort of, I think for anyone that does find themselves sort of in that situation, you don't have to be, sort of jumping for joy. I think it's really normal to be extremely sort of confused, to not know, want to do what you want to do, and possibly to, to sort of be considering the possibility of exploring your options.
Exactly.
I think all of that is just normal, and it's okay. You don't have to feel sort of bad or guilty or any of those things that we often feel.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much mum guilt about anything. It's like, if you don't breastfeed your baby, there's mum guilt.
There is.
If you don't start solid at 6 months, there's mum guilt. There's a lot of like, if you don't do this, and let's just not have mum guilt about, not being happy straight away when you found out you're pregnant. Even if it was planned, because sometimes you do plan it. You say, I want to have baby too, and it happens like straight away, and you go, oh, actually, that was really quick. Like, that was quicker than I anticipated. Obviously, how babies are made, but it can still take you by surprise. And so saying, oh, actually, I was really surprised, and it took me a bit to adjust. That's fine. Like, that's fine. There's no guilt that needs to be felt about that. That's how it is.
Exactly. And I think it's actually the same for when when your baby or babies are sort of like born as well. It's actually quite natural not to feel sort of like an overwhelming sort of sense of love, and nobody actually tells you that it can actually take some time to develop that sort of attachment and bond. And there's nothing wrong with you if you're not, head over heels. It's, it's sort of, a relationship is something that develops, over time. It's something that may take, a bit of an adjustment and all of that sort of stuff. So if you sort of are feeling that way, don't feel guilty about it. It's, it's entirely normal. And so too is it to feel completely overwhelmed with love. It's just everybody's experience is different.
Exactly. Yeah, so, exactly. So did you take different steps in terms of, mental health and that to because of this news, did you maybe see your psychologist maybe more frequently to talk through feelings and all of that, or?
Yeah, so I hadn't been, before I fell pregnant, I hadn't been seeing a psychologist, but the first thing I did was make sure that I told my doctor and said to her, look, I'm terrified of going through this process like again. Of postnatal depression. She was really good in, helping to, I think, calm me down in some ways, and sort of like reassuring me. She'd actually identified sort of like a fairly sort of long time ago that I likely had birth trauma. And so, when I fell pregnant, she was sort of aware of the circumstances. So knowing that, having a discussion with her around the possibility of trying sort of medication if I needed to during the pregnancy, just to keep me, mentally sort of like well. We talked very openly about that, and she was always very open with me about how I've been feeling and those sorts of things. But the psychologist I ended up getting probably about 3 months into the pregnancy, and I chose somebody that had an interest in women's health. And thankfully the psychologist I saw had actually had her own experience of postpartum depression. So she's been really good in sort of terms of sort of understanding, understanding where I've been at and some of the challenges that come along with that, and sort of normalizing, you know, sort of reactions and feelings and things like that. So I definitely think it's good to pre-plan, and it doesn't mean that anything's going to happen, but it's good to have that there just in case you do sort of, you know, you do fall back into depression. So, and it means you can tackle it early. You don't have to develop a relationship quickly with somebody. You've sort of got that pre-existing sort of, you know, relationship there, which makes it easier to open up to somebody, really.
Yeah, and because, I mean, you can get prenatal depression, which is depression during pregnancy. That's the thing, and we don't talk about it either. But it's good to preempt things, as you said, and prepare strategies, prepare services that are available, so that if you needed them, they're there. If you don't, that's fine. Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for, you know, I mean, you know, I've had some good friends that have gone through sort of anxiety during the pregnancy stage. It's not necessarily something that I have encountered a lot of myself, but I know for them, their anxiety has become really heightened. They've had, you know, sort of first children with sort of where they had significant kind of birth injuries and things like that. So that for them, it's been a real, you know, issue, and it's been good for them to have access to some support and things like that. You know, maybe access to medication prior to the sort of births of their next children. So, like I think it's everybody's experience is just different.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So how did your pregnancy go this time around? So you had less nausea, vomiting, but you had reflux.
Yeah. So I would say that they're, like, in a way, they're on par with each other, I think, in terms of I didn't have heartburn with Kai until the last sort of trimester, I think. And I think that that's pretty standard for most people that are pregnant. But definitely this time around, I had heartburn from a really early stage. I'm talking probably like at least within the first 8 weeks or so, I would say. I know. It's just one of those things. And I think my mental health, I think this time around it's probably been a bit better. I think maybe largely because my diet's been a bit better as well. I didn't have the food aversions, and I've been able to eat, you know, relatively normally. So yeah, they're sort of, I don't know, they're just really sort of like quite different in some respects. I guess going through it the second time, you sort of as well, you know more what to expect. Whereas the first time you have no idea.
Exactly. The first time you're like, yeah, let's dive into it. And then you discover, you know, what pregnancy is, what birth is, what labor is. You discover what postpartum is. And then you're like, oh, okay, I might think about it for baby 2 now.
Yeah. Definitely. I think there's more planning that goes into baby number 2 often. So, yeah.
How are you going through the same model of care, so through the hospital with a midwife obstetrician as well?
Yes. So I haven't changed that. I've been relatively happy with the sort of public healthcare system here. I didn't have, although I went through a bit of birth trauma with Kai, I don't think that had anything to do with the care that I received. I think it was just first time, you know, pregnancy and, you know, sometimes the difficulties that can come with that. Whereas I've had friends of mine that have had really sort of traumatizing hospital experiences where they wanted to obtain sort of private, you know, go through the sort of like the private sort of health system because they didn't want to repeat the experiences that they had in the public sort of health system,
Yeah.
which is, you know, a totally understandable. Again, I think just everybody's experience is different, and it's hard to, you know, know what's going to be right for you. You know, you can only sort of really judge it off, you know, your experiences and probably word of mouth to some degree. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as you said, you know, sometimes again, going private comes at a cost, not accessible to everyone. So some people have, you know, that chance of being able to access it.
Yeah.
And sometimes, regardless of financial barriers, it's having a private midwife that services the area, which can be difficult in rural locations. So sometimes it's difficult, even if you don't want to go through, you know, your local hospitals. Sometimes there isn't a choice, and that's difficult. How did you announce it to Kai, actually? Because he's 4.5, so you can obviously comprehend what it's like to have a sibling. I'm guessing he's got friends that have siblings, so he probably understands that.
Yes. So definitely, you know, sort of like definitely at his age, he understood that. So I actually didn't tell him until I went to Sydney to see my parents, and basically sort of told everybody pretty much at the same time. I knew for Kai that it was important to start sort of like preparing him sort of like mentally. I guess he was. I think in the early sort of like stages, he was sort of like, oh yeah, like that's, you know, that's good sort of thing. Now he's actually, you know, has become quite attached to the idea of it. He understands that, you know, sort of this is going to be his, you know, his baby brother, and that he's, you know, going to be a big brother, and that he's going to, you know, be able to teach him all of these things and all of that sort of stuff. So, yeah, he's definitely grown used to the idea now.
Oh, that's so cute. Did he ever ask for a sibling at any point?
He did. He probably asked about maybe a year or so before I actually fell pregnant. And it was something that I felt guilty about, because at that stage I was pretty sure that he might be the only one. And I sort of like, I felt bad because, you know, I kind of, you know, I wanted him to have a sibling, but at the end of the day, I was also scared of putting myself through that again. And also the, you know, the potential impact that it could have on him and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And honestly, you don't have a child for your child. You have a child because you want it.
No.
You don't do it to please your existing, you know, children or child you have.
No.
You do it because you want to. So again, mum guilt, you know, but it is how it is. If you're not ready for it, that's how it is.
Yeah. Exactly. I think at the end of the day, you know, you have to be the one that makes that sort of decision. And I mean, for some people, it may also come down to being a financial decision of whether, you know, can we afford sort of, you know, how many children can we afford? Is this doable for us? Do we even have the time? You know, if you're both sort of working in sort of, you know, sort of professional, busy sort of like jobs and things like that, all of those factors come into it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. There's a lot of thinking, considerations, factors to take into account. But yeah, it's it's good that Kai's excited. That probably helps as well. Obviously, you know, you're excited, Matt's excited, he's excited, you know. That's great. Did you prepare differently this time for maybe still the birth, maybe breastfeeding if you plan to, and postpartum as well?
Yeah. So this time around, I bought formula this time around just in case I have needed it. I also got bottles and things like that. I also started thinking about I think they refer to it as the 4th trimester. So that that's sort of 3 months after you give birth. So I started sort of like thinking about sort of, you know, sort of meals, pre-planning sort of like meals, also sort of putting together some sort of snacks and things like that. Nothing too exciting, but just making sort of, muffins, like things that you can hold in sort of one hand, I guess, nuts and those sorts of things that I didn't think about previously. And I also started taking, I saw a sort of nutritionist, I guess, and sort of looked at different vitamins and minerals and things like that would help me, I guess, to sort of like try and maintain a bit more of a balance once the baby comes along.
Yeah, exactly. Because it will be taxing on your body, obviously. Pregnancy is, labor and birth is, and then breastfeeding or not, just being postpartum, it's taxing on your body, and you need to replenish, the stores that went down during pregnancy. And also if the stores are continuing to go down with breastfeeding, then it needs to be replenished. So, nutrition is super important at any point in life, but especially pregnancy and postpartum.
Yeah. And I think it's also really important to consider, when you give birth as well, sort of like what you want to do in terms of like visitors and sort of like people sort of coming to see you and things like that. I know with Kai that I probably would have been better off actually not having any sort of visitors while I was in the hospital. I found having people constantly coming in and out, including like, nursing staff and orderlies as well as, family, was too much for me. And I think this time around I'm much more aware of, trying to space sort of visitors so that I'm not getting too sort of overwhelmed by people, and just, sort of setting sort of some boundaries when they need to be set, I guess, so that I'm not just doing things out of guilt.
Yeah, and see, that's a really good point. And sometimes it's hard because you've got family that's maybe pushy, I guess, and they want to see the baby that's just been born, and like, I get it. Yeah. But it's mentally, there's a lot of mental load that goes into having that person being there, and they, you have to somewhat entertain them, and and that's time where you're not resting. And it's time where maybe you're not feeding because maybe you're a bit shy, and stuff like that. And it's hard to put boundaries, but you have to. And that's the whole motherhood. Motherhood is putting boundaries and saying, this is how it is. And because I'm the mom, I'm the parent, I'm deciding. So it is how it is. And that's hard. But you learn it, I think, as you go, and, being baby two, you can say clearly, this is how it was with Kai. I do not want that for baby two.
Exactly. And I think it's just being strong in those sorts of, in those sorts of decisions. Like, if you don't want anyone visiting you at the hospital, then let people know in advance that you don't want them there because of, this and this reason. It doesn't mean that you're a horrible person who's trying to, stop the grandparents from seeing the kids or any of that sort of stuff. It's just that you're prioritizing, yourself and your needs, which are really valid at that time because you're completely sort of exhausted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, on top of it, if you've, potentially you've had a C-section or you've had an episiotomy and you've got that extra pain and just uncomfortableness, and you're trying to recover, and then you've got people. It's hard, but it's about setting boundaries. So baby two is coming in 2 weeks. Do you have a birth plan or birth preferences, I guess?
I think I've followed, I guess, a track that's sort of fairly similar to the one that I had previously. I think the only changes that I made was not to have the sort of try the sort of like showers and sort of birthing sort of pool and stuff like that. Only because, like last time my body just seemed to stop. So I don't think it was particularly helpful for me. I also, I was happy to go ahead with an episiotomy again. Epidural again this time. But I had gas and stuff like that last time, and I actually found it really ineffective. So I've just sort of decided that I'm not really that interested in that this time around. Yeah. I thought that I'd get a TENS machine instead. So just slightly sort of different things. I mean, I've let them know in the sort of, I guess, in the birth plan that I'm, happy if they do need to do an episiotomy or something, that, for them to go ahead with that, and that I'd prefer that over a cesarean, only because it's, cesareans, you often can't drive for a fairly sort of like long time. So yeah, I'd say it's kind of similar-ish, but with a few, I suppose, a few changes here and there.
Yeah. And who knows how because you might be induced, but your labor could spontaneously begin at any point before the induction. So
exactly.
Who knows how it starts, and therefore, depending on that, it potentially changes the preferences. So it's, just like for any birth, it's, you never know until you're in it. And even when you're in it, things can change anyway.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing to consider. It's like, if this is your first time giving birth, is that you kind of need to be flexible when you're giving birth, because things come up unexpectedly. There's emergency situations can happen. And the more flexible you are, I think the easier the process often.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I tend to say birth plan, but I meant to say birth preferences, because a plan implies that, it's set in stone. But obviously birth isn't. Unless you're having a planned C-section, and then usually that's pretty, that's pretty straightforward. It doesn't change much. But if it's spontaneous induction labor, it's you don't know what could happen. So usually birth preferences, but I say birth plan still.
That's all right. Yeah. So that's I think it's all just about going with the flow, really. It's It's just accepting that, sometimes things don't always work out. Just sort of being in the moments, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you'll have to come back to tell us the story of baby 2 being born, and how everything is going.
I'll have to let you know. Yes, definitely. Because I mean, it might also be the interesting insight after having gone through sort of a difficult experience with my first one to see what the differences between the experiences. I think.
Yeah, because it'd be great to talk about, obviously, your labor, your birth, but also the transition of having 2 children. The postpartum, how the fact that you're planning it differently, how it went, how it unfolded, and all of those things, mentally, physically, your recovery. It's there's a lot that we can talk about once baby 2 is born, and once you're ready for it, obviously.
Yep, definitely. I think that sounds like a good idea.
Amazing. Well, I think we'll leave it as that. I wish you all the best. I wish you a short labor and a very easy delivery. Yes, and an easy recovery. And all the best. All the best. Yeah, I can't wait to hear it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast, or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.